Welcome back, everyone, to the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com. We are coming to you live from the hallways of the sunny San Diego Convention Center here in Southern California. We are at the 2016 PMI Global Congress, and standing with me at a relatively nice table today is Beth Spriggs. Hello, Beth.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Have you already delivered your presentation?
I have.
Oh, how was it? Did they kick you out?
It was great. It was great. I had a full room, a lot of engagement, good conversations, and I always love it when the class teaches me more than I feel like I've taught them.
That's always the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Your topic is the risky business of assumptions, uncovering the truth as we assume it to be. What interests you in assumptions that you decided, okay, I'm going to write about this, I'm going to speak about this?
I think it's that we don't talk about them because they're assumed. And by their very definition, it's not something we talk about. And so I'm trying to bring it up to the forefront of our attention so that we do think about it, talk about it, discuss it, and realize the implications so we can do something about it. Because most of the time it's in the back of our mind. We don't even think to bring it up.
So I don't want to assume that everybody knows. So let me ask you this. What is an assumption?
An assumption is a truth or belief. It is something that we believe is true. Whether it is or not, it doesn't have to be true, but in our minds, we believe it is true. It very rarely is communicated. Usually we don't think to communicate it because it's true.
You
just know.
This,
you just know.
Right? Why do I have to tell you?
So why do you have to say it? Because that's just a belief in your mind.
Mm-hmm. Why can assumptions in the workplace get more dangerous?
So this is interesting, right? Because we live our lives with assumptions, right? Before I traveled to San Diego, I assumed I would get here safely, right? Before I go to the grocery store, I assumed the store was going to be open. When I got dressed in the morning, I assumed the weather predictions are accurate, right? Assumptions are the gatekeepers of behavior. Now, and most of the time they serve us well. They let us live our lives. We don't have to check them. We know they're going to work. The problem is they get dangerous in the workplace. And that is where the risk comes in. Because when we're at work and making assumptions, that's when things can go really wrong. So what I have learned is there's good assumptions and there's risky assumptions. And we're trying to figure out the risky ones and what we can do about them. And the very definition of the assumption is what makes them risky at work. Is the fact that it is something that we believe is true. We take action based on that belief. We don't check it. We just think it's right. But we are making actions and decisions and changing our behavior on it. And we don't talk about it. And at work, that gets very dangerous.
The main portion of your paper talks about a number of common assumptions. And we're going to go through them one by one, but what makes them common?
So these are things that I have seen in my experience come up over and over. And when I've talked with other people about assumptions, I generally get the same response. They're like, yep, I see that one all the time. And bringing these to our attention because of the risks around these.
All right, let's take a look at them. The first common assumption is assuming a project or task is easier or faster than it actually is.
Yes, and I feel like this is something that everyone can relate to. Last night in the session, so last night's session was the end of the day, right? 4 to 5, I know everyone's tired. So basically I was like, I know you all aren't going to raise your hand. So tell you what. Raise your hand only if this has never happened to you. Of course, no one raised their hand. And I'm like, so I'm going to assume this has happened to everyone. The fact that people think things are faster than they actually are is just rampant, and it changes expectations on our work. And if we don't call that out and reset those expectations, we're hurting ourselves, we're hurting our project timelines, we're hurting our goals, our success measures, and then it looks like we have failed. When the only thing we have failed to do is call out their assumption and reset expectations.
The second one is assuming priorities are aligned and haven't changed.
Yeah. So I look for help for someone, and then next thing you know, their boss puts them on something else and my thing drops on their list and they don't tell me, right? So I don't know. Or I've done that to them. So with all of these assumptions, I like to start with look at yourself first and what you're doing, because the first thing you can change is yourself. So if something in your work or priorities have changed, what have you done to communicate that out to someone else? Have you been responsible in making sure you're letting people know? And I'm the worst. I do this to my team all the time. I pull them off work and I constantly change. And I'm like, you know that thing you thought you were going to do this week? Yeah, you're not. You're going to work on this other project. And when we don't tell people the implications of those changes, someone else is sitting there going, well, gee, Stephen just never got back to me. He didn't talk to me, and it feels bad. Once we tell people and they have the context, then suddenly they get it. And those changes are okay. But we sit there and think that people's priorities haven't changed, that that they haven't gotten sick or that they're never going to get sick, that they're around. And so what we have to do is figure out ways to learn when things have changed and that we are responsible in telling people when things have changed.
Mm-hmm. The third common assumption is assuming who owns or is responsible for what.
Yes. This one comes with a lot of feelings. People have feelings about ownership. And it matters to them. That's my project. That's my thing. Don't mess it up. I don't want to hand it over because they're just going to screw it up. No, mine. Right? And so we feel so strongly that when we make assumptions around who is owning what, this gets into office politics, because office politics is also feelings driven. And now you're getting messed up with who's feeling what about the work and their assignments, especially when you get down to co-managing stuff. I'm going to do this half, you do that half. And my answer to that is define ownership and partnership. Always figure it out together. Put out your list of tasks, and say, I'm doing this specific one, you're doing that one, this one's me, this one's you. But do it together and define the ownership and partnership to call out those assumptions and bring them to the forefront.
Number 4, assuming people don't know how to use technology. What about the other way around? Assuming people do know how to use technology. Isn't that very close to it?
That's where I like to start. I like to start with the assumption that people do know how to use it. And then they have to prove me wrong. Now, that's because I've been in technology forever. And I saw this happen one day when I'm sitting in a meeting and we're building out a mobile app for people to use. And the mobile app worked great, but it was built to be viewed landscape or portrait view, right? And there was one page on it that was built landscape view.
Lovely.
And not a problem, right? Turn your phone. Someone in the room actually said, well, should we put instructions on the screen saying to turn your phone? And I was like, whoa, what did you just say? You just assumed that someone doesn't know how to turn their phone and you have to tell them how to do it? So we assume people don't know how to use technology at work when in our personal lives, you use it all the time. And I'm like, just assume that they know how to use this phone because they're on it all day in their personal lives. Assume they know how to book a flight. Assume they know how to do these things. And then I would rather err on that assumption than the other way around.
It's just as dangerous though.
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be. And actually what it does is it puts more of the burden on those of us who are software developers. I really push towards no training required, right? That is the movement of software development. No training required. You don't get training when you download an app on your phone. You're just supposed to use it. No one's going to sit there and walk you through a 30-minute tutorial on how to use that app. And software development has really pushed to that direction. You might get 2 prompts on a screen that you could skip if you want to, but it is intuitive. And so if we're developing in the right way and we're pushing things to where there's less training required and we assume people use technology in their personal lives and have some basic understanding, I think we can go a little further in what we're delivering out for our teams.
The 5th and final common assumption that you mention in your paper is assuming we know all the implications of changes we make.
Yeah, this one is scary. This one gets really scary because, and again, I see this a lot in the tech world, but it can happen any which way. where, someone changed one little setting or they did an upgrade and 2 systems down that it's connected to broke. And now we're paying $50,000, 2 weeks of employee time trying to clean up the mess that created. And they're like, well, I didn't think it would hurt anything. I didn't do anything. I just did this upgrade. But we don't always think and stop and check our assumptions on what we're doing and the implications of those changes. We think we know. We think we know and that we're good and we've checked everything. But have you really checked?
So these were the 5 common assumptions. Assuming a project or task is easier or faster than it actually is. Assuming priorities are aligned, haven't changed. Assuming who owns or is responsible for what. Assuming people don't know how to use technology. And assuming we know all the implications of changes we make. Common assumptions. How common are they?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I see them all the time to the point where I have been hurt by every single one of those, which is, I think, my own lessons learned and my own failures is what has driven me to write this and try to bring it up to other people's attention. Like, learn from my mistakes. Don't repeat my failures.
The good news about these 5, however, is we know about them. They are common. I think, I find myself in these again and again. I do this. People on my teams do these. So as the project begins, we know about these and we can go, okay, are we assuming this? What do we do about it? Is this actually true? But then there are those that are hidden, not common assumptions that we don't know about. How do we detect those?
And that's the next part. This is like we've got a few steps here to figure out how do we uncover these assumptions. One, and again, I always start with look at yourself first before you go to other people. Start with looking at your own assumptions. Pull out a pen and paper or your computer and write them down. The exercise of forcing yourself to write it makes you think about it. And then you're putting that deliberate, intentional thought behind what am I actually assuming? That's step 1. Start there with yourself. And then with everything we do in project management, if you document or write anything, it is somewhat useless unless you share it, right? So the next thing you have to do is share it. So you've written down your own assumptions, share out those assumptions with all of your stakeholders on your project, and they will tell you if your assumptions are right or wrong. It's one thing to call it out, but it's still something you're believing is true. Now you got to check and see, were those beliefs actually right or wrong? And you need someone else to validate that.
And as you are sharing them, will you also be uncovering their assumptions?
So that's my experience has found that when I call out my own and share it, it gets people thinking about their own. And then that just generates more thoughts. And then they hear mine and they go, well, oh, geez, maybe I should tell you, since you told me that, maybe you should know I was also assuming this thing over here. And it creates a dialogue and a conversation around it, which I think it's really helpful.
What's next?
So the next step is to just ask a lot of questions. Tons of questions.
Is this assumption right?
All of it.
Do you feel the same? Do you feel different? Have I forgotten anything?
Yes. So one tactic I have tried with this is I will send staff into a meeting and I will say, you have 30 minutes with this person. You will do nothing but ask questions. That's it. You might have ideas in your head. You might come with solutions. Write them down because I want to hear nothing but questions out of you for the next 30 minutes. It's hard to do. And the people who have taken
I do this all day long. I do interviews repeatedly.
Great. You can come coach my team on how to do it. Because they jump to the solution and they want to start providing answers. And so I'm trying to pull their thinking back from jumping straight to the answers. Just keep asking questions. Another great tactic is just doing a Q storm and doing the question storming, where all you're doing is figuring out what all those questions are versus, the brainstorm where you're coming up with all the answers. Really gets to some really thoughtful and intentional questions.
Where do we take it from here?
So again, now that I've written out my questions, you got to share it out and then ask people for theirs. So same model. You start with yourself and then you share it out and then ask people for their questions. What do you have for me? What don't you know? What can I help you with? Figure out what their list of questions is.
Okay. And is that it?
So the last one, and this is one of my favorites, although this was an interesting point of conversation in my session, is asking someone else what other people are saying. Okay, so this gets into,
Hearsay.
You got to navigate this carefully. There's politics involved. Basically, you're asking people for the gossip, is what you're doing. I'm like, Cornelius, what did Wendy tell you about this project? And the reason this deals with power dynamics, because Wendy might not tell me, Wendy might not go to a vice president and say, hey, here's how I feel about this, but might come to you and feel very differently and feel comfortable telling you stuff. Now, what you don't want to have happen is that backfire where you tell me something and then Wendy's like, wait, how did you hear that? What's happening here? What are you saying about me? So you really have to navigate that carefully. You got to know who you trust. You have to have good relationships. You got to ask the right questions. But people will tell other people different information than they will tell you. And what you want to try to get is various perspectives. And not only will I necessarily hear what Wendy's saying to someone else, but I will hear your lens, your take on what she's saying, which is a whole other way of looking at it. So I'm trying to come at it from a bunch of different angles. I'm like, here's what I've got. Tell me what you've got. I want to hear what he's got. I want to go up. I want to go down. I want to go sideways. And I'm going to get all these communication channels and figure that out. And there is one other piece to this, which is an actual template for uncovering assumptions. So I just have an Excel sheet, worksheet template. There's an exercise that I do with teams where I start at the beginning of a project and I'll say, each team member, I want you to write down, we do this in real time together, not like turn it in on Friday. We do it all at the same time together. We say, write down the spreadsheet, your assumptions. It's hard to get going, but once someone sees others' assumptions, it gets their brain thinking about their own. Then you rank them. You rank everyone else's assumptions. -1, I had no idea they thought that. 0, I thought that I held the same one. I didn't. 0 is I knew that they had that assumption. +1 is I have the same assumption. Score it across the team. Pick out your low numbers, and whatever's at the bottom, those are the new risks for your risk register. You have now just uncovered a whole new set of risks that now we can use our risk management principles to mitigate, avoid, maximize, figure out what we're going to do. But assumptions are risks. And that's how we need to think of them. And so all this is trying to do is figure out new risks that you're going to try to manage.
Great. Everyone listening to this podcast right now is thinking to themselves, where can I get that template? Beth, where can I find that template?
Great. You can go to bethspriggs.com. There is a page there called Tools and Templates, and you can download it for free. And there's a bunch of free tools and templates on that page, and that is one of them. All
right. Back to the assumptions. Why have we not had anyone else talk about assumptions in the past 300 and almost 80 episodes of the Project Management Podcast? Why is this something that needs to be uncovered?
That's an excellent question. I'm like, oh, man, people aren't talking about this.
Yeah.
And I go back to the fact that these are things we sit with and just believe they're true. We just think they're right. And so we haven't done enough to push our own thinking. I feel like we just have not, we go through our risk management, we go through our communication plan, we go through all, we document everything, we've got our project management plan, but have we done enough to really push our own thinking, check our own assumptions? You're not calling out direct questions, you're calling out your own beliefs of truth. And that's where we stop. We don't really call out our own, what we believe is just true, inherently true. I just assume that this person's going to get back to me in 48 hours. I could be way off, but that's an assumption I just think is right because I'm also assuming their priorities are the same as mine. And I think that this is super important to them, so of course they're going to get back to me. Why wouldn't they? But as soon as you put it on paper and as soon as you share it out, you give someone else the opportunity to either validate or to say, you know what, that's not right. And now you've also created opportunity for yourself to take action and do something about it. And this is all plays directly into risk management. To me, it's just an extension of our risk management. It's taking it that one level further. You've looked at your risks. Have you checked your assumptions? And those are risks. And so now we can do something with that. But I don't know. I'm excited to be talking about it. If people aren't, then maybe we will start talking about it. I think it's great.
Because the moment I saw this in the lineup for the Congress, I'm thinking, I gotta have Beth on the program. I have to reach out to her. This is a topic we haven't talked about. This is a topic that I've never seen anybody talk about. Let's just ask the most obvious question I possibly can. Why is it important that we know our assumptions, that we work on them? How is it going to make my project succeed?
Yep. It's important because they're points of failure. And as we look at project success rate and we keep trying to push and we're trying to find more ways to get our projects more successful, these assumptions are points of failure that we have previously not yet uncovered or figured out. So if we can figure that out, now we have enabled ourselves to do something about it and not have them be failure points, because now we're more aligned. Because the how is that you have now figured out these points of failure, and then that can make your project more successful. I'm sort of giving you a twofer. I'm doing like
yeah, it was such an obvious question that probably by answering the first part, you automatically answered the second part as well. In conclusion, our listeners are probably now scratching their heads going, oh yeah, Beth is right. You know, there are probably assumptions on our project and we don't even know about them. And it's an ongoing project. You're not in the planning stages anymore. You're already in execution, and you might be realizing, oh yeah, that might be a reason why things aren't working all that well. What do? I'm in the middle of my project and I realize I need to do this.
Easy. It's never too late. This is not a planning phase only exercise. Do it. Do it right now today. Any phase of your project. Because, and here's why that works. Because you're uncovering risks. And how often are we supposed to check our risk register? Regularly, right? That's not something you do once and set aside and don't go back, because then they're not effective. You're supposed to be checking that risk register and updating your risks on a regular basis. And when you do that, put your assumptions in there. So if you have not looked at those assumptions yet, do it right now today, mid-project, doesn't matter. What you're going to do is now update your risk register. And when you have that next conversation with your project sponsor around risks and you're now making updates and doing those continual iterations, it just rolls right in. It rolls right in.
Beth, thank you so much for coming on the program today and talking to us about assumptions.
Thank you, Cornelius. This has been an awesome opportunity. Loved having this conversation. Super excited to keep talking about this topic and to get it out there some more.